Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Emily Sander has spent more than 15 years in the business world, but when she realized that her favorite role was mentoring leaders, she decided to pursue coaching. As a C-suite executive and ICF certified coach, she combines her experience and proven insights with a keen ability to understand each client's unique personality and situation. Emily is the author of the book, Hacking Executive Leadership. Go from insecure, indecisive, and overloaded to confident, influential, and effective. She is a regular guest on several media platforms, including podcasts and news outlets. She believes that the simple fact is that your career and journey as a leader has no singular destination, only constant evolution. As you walk your own path, Emily is here to help you make decisions that best suit your vision of the leader you want to be and the leader you want to become. Emily Sander, what an honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Hi, Casey. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. It's such an honor. As I was learning a little bit about you and about your message, it sounds like you've got a bit of a background in sports. Is that correct?
I do indeed, yes. So I played sports very heavily in middle school through high school. I played in rec leagues in college. And then I've kind of transitioned in the last probably 10, 15 years into just working out at the gym, staying active and those sorts of things. But definitely fitness and health and holistic well-being is definitely a passion of mine and something I love learning more about and talking to people about. So very happy to be on your show.
Oh, that's great. No, this is such an interesting crossover, which I definitely want to talk about. What sports were you most involved with?
Soccer and basketball were my sports.
Gotcha. So I played men's ice hockey here at a small college for like a minute. Like, yeah. So
a hot minute.
Yeah, a hot minute. Like they just needed a warm body. I'm not that great, and everybody on the team was better than me. But I got to play, and I got to experience like what it's like to get like smacked up a little bit by somebody at the college level in hockey, and that was quite a physical kind of game. It was maybe like 10 or 15 years later. I remember I was single at the time, and somebody invited me to play in a co-ed indoor soccer league, like a mid-level, not a big deal, like Monday night co-ed soccer thing. And I was like, great. Like I used to play in third grade recess. I'm sure this will be fine. I was stunned by how physical some of those women are in soccer. That was way worse than playing college hockey. I was playing like weeknight, mid-level.
Soccer is a contact sport. Everyone's like, soccer's not I'm like, that's BS. Like you haven't played soccer, you will get roughed up, man. Yeah. But yeah, that reminds me, I was playing in a rec basketball league, and sometimes really good players who are in like a higher league than us would come down and kind of practice. And this dude came at me, and he was probably like 6'5", 240 pounds. And I was trying to screen him, and he just went full bore. Normally the men kind of do a little bit on really not. I went flying. I went airborne. And he was like, I am so sorry. I was like, no problem. Thanks. Thanks for the chiropractic adjustment.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. From my experience, like the girls, like as they're coming towards you, they're not looking at you. They're looking right through you. You better get out of the way if you're between them and the goal for sure. Very physical sports.
Yeah, it gets fierce. Yeah, for sure.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, like I said, it was really interesting to come up on your profile and dig into your work. Initially, I saw what you do and saw you spend most of your time in the corporate world. And I, for one, could not be more grateful to be out of the corporate world after being in it for over a decade. But the more I looked into what you do in your work and again, your passion, health and fitness also, there's a lot of crossover here. The way you talk about habits and the way you coach your executives is not very different than the way we coach really anybody, and could be very applicable for all of life. So we're so grateful for you to be able to come on our show. Let's hear a little bit about your backstory. How did you grow up, and when did business become something you wanted to pursue?
Certainly. I mean, business was front and center from the beginning. Both my mom and dad were successful business people in their respective fields. And I didn't, know what I wanted to do clearly. Like I want to be an accountant, or I want to be an astronaut, and those things from when I was little. But I would say I want to be a successful business person. And I didn't quite know what that meant at the time, but I would be able to tell you that. And so, through a series of circumstances, had worked my way into a number of small to medium technology-based businesses, starting in the Seattle area. I got to grow a client management team from scratch internationally, and that was a lot of fun, and cut my teeth there. And then went on to scale other, global teams and operations teams, and worked my way up to the C-suite and executive leadership. But that's always just kind of been in the back of my mind. And I remember, again, very small, my mom and dad telling me about different leaders in history and different world leaders and political leaders and business leaders. And the way they talked about it was a very almost noble thing, and almost something that when you get to a position of leadership, you have a great responsibility and you have to take care of people, which as I got older is very different than a lot of people's definition and descriptions of leadership. It's like I get to be in charge of people and I get to tell people what to do, and I have all the power, and that's why I go after it for the glory. So yeah, that was kind of my entree into the business world and leadership, and I'm very happy to be working with business professionals and kind of crafting their leadership style and getting them in best position to lead, which a lot of times goes to the physical and kind of mental aspects, not necessarily the quote unquote hard skills that a lot of people point to. So taking care of yourself and getting yourself in best position to lead, there's a lot of overlap there.
Wow, interesting. What was it like to transition from, being more corporate to helping more of the leaders? Was that just something? It sounds like it was something that was very natural for you.
It was. I mean, I wrote this book, Hacking Executive Leadership, and it's because I have learned all these things the hard way. I have gone through trials and tribulations the hard way, and I'm like, let me help folks and be able to, learn from my mistakes and hopefully take some shortcuts. But another reason is I was having, numerous conversations with colleagues and team members and different people across the companies that I worked for and across the different roles, and a lot of the same themes were coming up over and over. And I said, okay, there's certain frameworks and concepts and tools that you can apply to different situations that are just really helpful for you to have in your back pocket, in your tool belt, in your quiver, whatever analogy you want to use. And so giving people those, I think, is sometimes even better than, here is the specific answer to your problem, or here's like my specific recommendation to your situation. Instead, like, hey, here's a framework you can use. Let me tell you a little bit about how it works or how I've seen it work well in the past. What do you think of that? How would that apply to you? Do you think that's relevant to you? And go with that. So, at the beginning of my career, I was very stressed. I was very working hard was a badge of honor. So I would brag about how little sleep I got to people. I would be caffeinating very heavily. Starbucks got a lot of my money. And I would also worry a lot. I would worry about people's perception or worrying about looking good. And so when I look back at that, 15, 20 years ago now, night and day difference. So I've kind of done a lot of learning the hard way and aggressive self-improvement, and really, wanted to be the best leader I could be and be that, noble leader and the one who's serving people, and done a lot of work on myself. So it was kind of a natural transition in my journey. And then also, you mentioned it at the intro, but I found that my most fulfilling times and experiences were helping others, kind of the one-on-one interactions where it's helping Jennifer literally get a promotion to her next role, or maybe it's helping Christian on his confidence for presenting, and now he can do that, and just making these little tiny career trajectory changes for people that sets them on a new path. And that's how I got into coaching, and that's kind of how I worked my way into that.
Wow, that sounds just so much more fulfilling and so much more aligned with your, life calling. It must be wonderful to help people along and help them succeed professionally and or personally. That's so cool. So tell us a little bit more about some of the mistakes that you commonly see. I guess just generally with everybody. I don't think you need to be a C-suite executive to deal with burnout and stress. What kind of patterns were you noticing, not only with yourself that you've already described, but with the people that you work with?
Yeah, so a big one is how hard do I work and how long do I work? So a lot of people derive their value out of the number of hours they work or the production that they create. And I have this analogy in my book, but there is an actual point of diminishing returns where it is the smart thing to do to stop working. And I'll explain that a little bit more. So let's say you're in an office and you're working late at night on a project and you haven't slept, more than 4 hours a week that previous night. So you are like dragging. So you'll, drink some coffee and try to push out another 2 hours. There's a point where you're going to reach that threshold of diminishing returns, meaning if you go beyond that, your work isn't worth it. Like you would be better to stop. And a lot of people go, no, I have to show I'm staying late and I have to show that I'm working hard. So you could spend 2 hours that night, or you could go home, rest, wake up the next morning, spend 1 hour to accomplish what you were going to accomplish in two, and the work product is of higher quality. And so that's an equation that I kind of bring up with people and say, hey, it's not necessarily like rise and grind all the time. Like, yes, there is a time and place for that, but sometimes it's what's the smart thing to do? What's the most beneficial for myself and my team? And I think that concept can be very easily translated to working out at the gym. So literally in a workout session, there comes a point when you're doing junk volume. There comes a point when like you can do more sets, you can do more reps, but you're not gaining any benefit from that, and you might be actually doing a net negative. So you're hurting yourself. You're setting yourself for injury or a muscle tear or whatnot. You would be better served to stop, go do your recovery modality or whatever you have, come back the next training session and have a higher quality workout, and then gain more muscle or lose more fat or whatever your goal is. So I think that's one of the big principles and common things I see is people just try to grind and like go to failure and all these things, when really you would do much better if you learned how to regulate yourself and be smart about it.
Wow. I'm so glad you went there with that. This is the E word is what I call it, which is enough. When do you know that your work is enough? It's such a challenging question. Every single day I have a tough time deciding when am I going to close my laptop, and what I did is what I did. And I'm just going to have to leave it in its own little compartment and say, that was Thursday. My Thursday is done. Now I need to move on to a different day. That's a very difficult question to answer. I'm curious to know your experience, or maybe compare my experience and see if this is really common with people. But when I'm getting to that point of, do I grind it out for another few hours, or do I stop now and try to pick it up in the morning? I usually notice that I tend to get really stuck or create a lot of mistakes if I grind through, where in the morning I come at things with a new perspective or new energy, and I can solve things, in 10 minutes that maybe would have taken me an hour and a half, plus, not creating more mistakes that I would have had to go back and correct later. Is that pretty common with people?
It is, yeah. I mean, there's a whole bunch of biological things that happen when you sleep. Your memory gets kind of reloaded, and you have new ideas. You're literally thinking better. Your brain is operating better. So there's that part of it. But yeah, I think something that came up when you were talking is a lot of people get into what I call tunnel vision in their day. So they're like, literally like, what's my calendar say? I have back-to-back meetings for 10 hours. Cool. I have all these projects. I'm going to like deep dive into this. And they don't come up for air, so to speak. So they're the whole day, they're just like holding their breath and grinding their way through. And so what I try to do is there's preventative self-care that you can do to kind of not let yourself slide into that. And then of course there's check-ins that you can build in throughout the day. And just mental grounding and giving yourself perspective and checking in with yourself about like, hey, like, how am I doing? Where am I at? Where is my time best spent? Where am I going to maximize the gains that I want to make today, or the objectives I want to complete today? And those things can really help, because sometimes, I think we've all had that sensation where we get to the end of the day and we're like, wait, how did we get here? Or like when you're driving somewhere and you're like, okay, I drove somewhere and clearly I was driving, so I got there, but like, I don't remember that drive, that sensation of like, I just went through the motions, or I went through those 10 hours, but I don't really remember being there. Putting in some kind of checkpoints or milestones for yourself can go a long way with that.
Oh, that's great. Tell us a little bit more about that preventative self-care. What kinds of things do you recommend as far as that goes?
Yeah. So first of all, just to get this principle out there, I think it's really important is in Greg McKeown's book, Essentialism, he talks about the idea of protect the asset. And I talk about it in my book in terms of leadership. But what that is think of a singer. I'll just use the example. And her voice is her asset. And so she would do well to protect it and take care of it. So let's say she has a concert, the next day she's not going to go out and go party and go scream at people and, get tired and all that stuff. She's going to take care of it. She's going to train it. She's going to do all the things she needs to do to prep in order to perform at her best the next day. And so in leadership, protecting the asset is you, because you make decisions and you communicate with people, and you are the mechanism through which your leadership expresses itself. And so I just want to level set with a lot of my clients, like, hey, when you hear self-care, or, sometimes I call it the priming phase because people think self-care is soft, or getting ready to turbocharge yourself, that is part of your job, and you will get maximal effort from that. You'll be more effective when you do that. So that's the first thing. And then it really depends on the person. So I have clients who do like to operate at almost the edge of chaos. And that's where they operate best, and they acknowledge it, and they've tried different things, and that's just how they operate best. And so, their distractions, or let me get perspective, is skydiving, or like going in the cage with sharks. And I'm like, that would not calm me down. That would freak me the freak out. But if that works for you, fantastic. Let's build that into your schedule. Let's make sure you have those things. And some people, it's like, I want to sit down and read, and I want to go, walk outside. And so you build those types of things in. There's a lot of, getting to know yourself, and, finding how to use your time most efficiently in terms of energy in your day. So some people, my peak performance hours are probably between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And so if I have like real critical things that I want to be top of game for, I try to get those in those hours if I can, but sometimes it's not possible. But just knowing that and being able to adjust your schedule and adjust what you're having to do is a good one. And then some check-in tools that I like to use are like, if you're walking through a certain doorway, or you're opening your car door, or something that you're doing throughout the day, every time you do that, you either remember to kind of take a 10-second pause, or you remember to ground yourself with a certain saying or a go-to statement. And those are some things that are helpful to build in, especially if you're busy. I'm very busy. Casey, I know you're very busy. A lot of us are running around taking care of kids, trying to do our career. So if I were to say, what would really be good for you is for you to sit down and meditate for 90 minutes. Well, yes, that would benefit all of us probably. But, most people would look at me with, like I had 3 heads and just run the other direction. So it's building in these interim steps and these more reasonable and realistic things to build those habits and to still get some incremental benefit out of them.
That is so helpful. I love all of that. I love that you mentioned Greg McEwen. I remember when we started our business, and started venturing out as entrepreneurs during the pandemic, I started looking up people and, reading the Crush Its and, all the social media books and how to, publish and do all this work. And it was really overwhelming. And coming across Greg's work of, essentialism and effortless, and just realizing what are the most basic things that I can cover, it really freed up this whole, another world for us, where we didn't have to do everything all the time. We could just focus on 1 or 2 things and let that be totally fine. And I'm so glad you talk about it in your book as well. You talk about managing your time to mastering your time. Are there any other strategies or tools for time management that you recommend?
Yeah, certainly. So again, a mental piece on that is, well, let me say 2 things here. So we've all heard play to your strengths. And I think that's important. And you should certainly know where your areas of strengths are, what things you do well, what things come naturally, what do people know you for, et cetera, et cetera. Those are your areas of strength. And spend your time there. And that's twofold. So one, you will get more done in your areas of strength because you're better at them, and typically you like them more. And then 2, if you're doing something that is in a weakness or a development area, you're not only spending time there and it's harder for you to accomplish those things because you're not as good, but when you get to the stuff that you're good at, you're burnt out. Like, you've spent a lot of energy, so you're not as good at the areas of strength. So it kind of is stacked against you in that sense. So I would certainly identify your areas of strength. If you don't know them, ask a friend, get a coach, ask a mentor, et cetera. And then make sure that you're structuring your time and structuring your days and weeks towards those things. And if you have an area of weakness, hire someone to that if you can, build a process around that, automate that wherever possible, and do those things. And then the second piece, which is the mental side, is be really aware of when you're in the green zone and red zone, And in short, green zone is good and positive, red zone is bad and negative. And so if you're spending time, saying, hey, I am a problem solver, I have creative ideas, I'm a great communicator, I'm a good leader, those are all green light thoughts, and they move you forward. And conversely, if you're kind of in the red zone where you're like, oh, like I can't get anything done, how did I not see that? I messed up on that. I'm not good with people. All these are red light thoughts, and they make you stop. And so spending your time and being cognizant of kind of think about what you're thinking about and make sure you're spending your time in that green zone will get you further faster. Because if you're constantly stopping and having to stop at these red lights, you're literally wasting time, and you're also draining yourself of energy. So I would set that in front of you and say, okay, let me just do a quick dashboard check and say, where am I? Am I in the green zone or am I in the red zone? Am I playing to my strengths or am I playing to my weaknesses?
Wow. Yeah, that is so helpful and such a practical tip, because I don't think many of us have inner critics that are really super polite and nice to ourselves. Seem to be pretty harsh on ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. The having good mental chatter is a good habit to try to work on, though. So yeah, I totally get it. I have a horrible self-critic that blares its nonsense on my internal PA system, and I have to tell it to quiet down and turn down the volume on that. Easier said than done, I understand, but yeah, certainly well worth the effort.
Yeah, totally. And you must see that a lot with high performers. I mean, I think it just comes along with the territory, and something that can, be helpful and drive people to performance, but also, like you said, something to be aware of. This is really related to another concept in your book that I would love for you to explain to the listener, which is the failure loop. I really loved understanding this concept. Can you tell us a little bit about the failure loop?
Absolutely. So the failure loop is a framework that you can use that turns the definition of failure on its head, and it helps you use it to your advantage. So in the book, I have a graph of this, but I'll explain it to listeners. There's a chain of individual loops that goes up and to the right. So the chain goes up and to the right altogether. And within the individual loop, there is a point on that loop where you go back down into the left. And that's the direction you don't want to go. So that represents the quote unquote failure event. So, hey, I blew my diet, or hey, I didn't do a good job on that presentation, or hey, I went and tried to start a business and it failed, it didn't work out. And so that's when you get a whole bunch of self-criticism going. You might get some external chatter from your friends and family being like, why didn't you do that? And you're berating yourself. So a lot of people stop and they go, oh, I failed. And they kind of sit down and they cry and they declare themselves a failure. And if instead you take that experience and you say, hey, this feels really, really crappy, but I'm going to take the lesson and learning out of it and apply it next time, that's what propels you to the next part of the chain of loops. So you've just propelled yourself back up and to the right. And if you think about that and that process, you've just had an experience, you've learned how to do something better, and you've applied it. That is literally the definition of learning. And so that's how you transform failure, in quotes, to progress and improvement and growth. And if you do that consistently over time and over your life, you will become a successful person. You are a successful person when you do that. And so I love the idea of this failure loop, and I love working with leaders in business or anyone on this because instead of seeing that as a negative and a mark of like, oh, I'm a failure, this proves it, it can also be like, no, this is the mark of a successful person. I've put myself out there. I'm on my growth edge. I'm trying new things. I'm doing things for the first time, and I'm not doing well perfectly the first time. And so it's almost a mark of success. I have clients who are like, Emily, like I used to get super nervous before going into a board meeting. And I used to like think about that for weeks and weeks. I used to over prepare, and I used to freak out and ruminate on every little thing I said wrong. And now I still feel a lot of those feelings. They don't go away. I still feel a lot of those emotions, but I almost like it. I look forward to it because I know that I am going to learn from it. I'm going to progress, and it's a mark of success for them.
Wow. That's so interesting and such a cool reframe. It's funny as humans, I think most of us can look retroactively at our lives and say like, oh yeah, well that didn't work out that I thought was so important that led me down this path and this did work out to put me where I am today. Or that relationship thought it was going to be the one and it didn't work out and it was horrible, but it led me to the better relationship. It's so funny how we can look back and see that fairly easily, I would say, but we project in the future that whatever we're getting stuck at today is going to cause so many problems down the road without realizing, no, that's going to lead me to my next successes, and growth. Like you said, I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, you hit on some such great points. So one is hindsight, 2020 hindsight is a great thing. It's lovely. We all wish we could see that as clearly as we do when everything's said and done. But something to keep in mind for your listeners is ask yourself this: did I make the best decision I could with all the information I had at the time? And if you answer yes to that, you literally could not have done better. If you made the best decision you could with all the information you had at the time, you made the best decision. Now, maybe your information was limited, maybe something else came up afterward, but that's irrelevant. If you made the best decision, great. If you look back and you say, "Ooh, like Emily, like no, like even at the time, I probably knew a little bit better," then you might want to take a look at that and maybe throw it in the failure loop and say, "What can I learn to make my decision making better?" So that's the first thing. Something else you mentioned that's key is don't conflate a decision and an outcome. So a lot of people fuse together a decision and an outcome. So they say, "Hey, I made this decision. The outcome was positive, therefore it was a good decision." Or I made a decision, the outcome was negative, and therefore I'm a bad decision maker. And yes, they are related, but there's also so many factors that could go into an outcome. Your decision might be a very small one. Sometimes it's larger and more significant, but sometimes there's other things at play. And so just keeping in mind, hey, decision making and outcome are separate. They're not automatically fused together. So when I talk to leaders very often about their decision making, it's, hey, you're being really hard on yourself for this decision going quote unquote wrong. Let's take a look at when you had to make this decision. You didn't know about the market downturn that was going to happen. You didn't know about so and so who was going to leave. You didn't know about this other competitor who was doing this thing. So let's just take a look at the decision you made at the time. Was that the best decision you could have made? If the answer is yes, then I kind of take them on one path and get them to move forward. If the answer is no, and they said, "Emily, I tried to take the easy way out. I tried to take the path of least resistance versus doing the hard thing. I just didn't want to do it." Then okay, that's a different conversation. But decision and outcome is a key one. And then the third thing and final thing that came up when you were talking was, yeah, we can think, "Oh my gosh, this is a horrible circumstance. Like I got laid off." And yeah, that's, we usually slap on a negative label, but you don't know what door that could open. You don't know if that actually gets you over into a career path that you're going to love long term. And that's really where you're fulfilled and rewarded. So oftentimes what we see as these closed doors or stumbling blocks become our stepping stones to something greater. So I would be very, very open to that. That's happened many times in my life where I'm like, oh, I have a plan. Everything must happen to my plan or else things are going to be bad. And oh no, like life happened and things fall off the wagon and things go in different directions and things are unexpected. But a lot of times that turned out for my good and that turned out for my benefit. And I look back and I say, oh, like, thank you for not answering my prayers and like going after what I wanted, because I actually wanted this over here. So I would just be very open to that as well.
That's so well said. The pandemic closed down the gym that both my wife and I were working on. They placed us on unemployment, and within 3 months, we had started our new business. So that's an example of something really, really unpleasant happening, and a really scary situation all over the world that opened a door for something different. And I love that you talked about decisions and outcomes. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Annie Duke. She wrote the book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thinking in Bets.
Thinking in Bets. Yeah. The way she talks about the play from the Super Bowl with the Seahawks and the Patriots, and everybody criticized the coach for making the call. And her point was like, no, this was a really smart call. It just didn't go very well. And I think, she relates to that in the book as well. There's a lot of situations like you explained in business and life where, maybe it didn't go your way the way you thought, but if you did the best you could, that's a total reframe on your decision-making process. I love that. I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm actually from Seattle. They were talking about Pete Carroll, who he got eviscerated in the press for making that call, eviscerated. And he stood up there and as a good leader, he one, took responsibility. Like, that was my decision. That was my call. And two, he would politely remind reporters who were going after him, like, the outcome was certainly not what we wanted it to be, but the
Yeah.
decision was sound.
Wow.
And I was like, good for you, Pete Carroll.
I love that. Were you destroyed by that play?
Yeah, I remember watching that. I was with my aunt and cousins, and my cousin like threw a glass and broke it. It was just like, what
Oh,
just happened? It was heartbreaking, crestfallen. Like, everyone thought it was going to Marshawn Lynch for a handoff and easy touchdown. We were all getting ready to celebrate, and then just disbelief, gut punch, unbelievable.
there's something about Seattle fans that are like really true fans for sure.
Yeah, we're being tested this year for sure. So
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Definitely. Wow. Another thing that you talk about a lot, I think, is really important and applicable to anything is limiting beliefs. How, in what ways do we limit ourselves in what we can accomplish, and how do we get over that?
Yeah, that's a large topic, but I'll say a few things. So we all have a belief set, and we're all looking at the world through a certain kind of lens. And I have the analogy of a contact lens in my book because oftentimes we don't know that they're there. Yet everything we're looking at, everything we're experiencing, every interaction we have is being seen through that lens and being seen through that filter. And so, one thing that I would encourage everyone to look at is take inventory of your belief set. And a lot of times, you're holding on to old beliefs that might not be serving you. So a simple example is, you might tell a little kid like, "Hey, Billy, don't talk to strangers." And that is perfectly sound advice if little Billy is walking to school for the first time and you don't want him to talk to strangers. It would land much differently if you're talking to William as an adult and he's going into a conference where he should network for work and say, don't talk to strangers. That doesn't make sense anymore. So there's lots of belief sets, even from childhood or even from a few years ago, where we were very different people, and that's holding us back and it's limiting the way we see things and the way we feel and the action we take. And so, one of my personal ones is, I cared about what other people thought of me, and I would need external praise to feel good, feel like I was doing a good job. And that's how I measured if I was doing a good job. How many people said, "Hey, Emily, like that was really great," or like, "Good job, Emily." And now, that got me to a certain point at a certain time in my career, and it served its purpose kind of. But now it's like, you know what, you can tell me I did a crappy job, and you can kind of say negative things to me, and I'm like, okay, like, you offered that to me, and you have a right to your opinion, and I have a right to ignore it, and so I'm just going to keep going. And that serves me. That belief set serves me better now, and it's pointing me and getting me towards things that I want now. And so sometimes you have to kind of take inventory of the beliefs that you're looking at the world through and at yourself through, and say, hey, let me keep the ones that I want to keep, and maybe let me switch out some that are not serving me well and replace them with something better.
Mm. It almost sounds very much related to like a yet mentality where you tell yourself like, yeah, I don't know how to do this, but I don't know how to do this yet. I can learn, I can grow, I can figure things out along the way. Is that related?
Yes, exactly. And sometimes, the new belief is like too far out there. So, one thing that like my coach actually does with me is we'll come up with a potential new belief or a go-to statement. And she'll say, "Emily, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, how much do you believe that?" And it has to be a 10 for you to really let that sink in and get that emotional piece. Because, logic makes us think, but emotion makes us act. So it has to be like down to that level. And if it isn't, then she might put an interim step in there. So it might be like, "Hey, I'm learning to care about what I think the most." So do I 100% believe that? Like, yes. Or like, I'm open to caring less about what other people think. So that's kind of like the interim. Maybe I'm not all the way there yet 100% of the time, but am I open to that? And am I learning how to do that? Yes, 100%, like 10. And so use those as kind of a interim step or a stair step function to get yourself there.
Wow. No, that's great. I love how thoughtful you were about the contact lens, because you could have said, looking through binoculars or any other thing that you could look through, but you chose contact lens, which I think is important, and kind of making the point that if it's a contact lens, you might not even know that you're wearing it. You might not even know what those limiting beliefs are until you slow down and become aware, through mindfulness, what those things you're telling yourself is, so that then you can go address them.
Yes. And I think that's key. I mean, I outline this in my book, but the sequence is beliefs, feelings, and action. And so if you're like sitting there going like, well, Emily, like, how do I know like my belief set? And like, how do I know if I've had them since childhood? Sometimes they're hidden beliefs, and sometimes they're in our blind spot, which we all have, by the way. We all have blind spots. And that's normal. But one way to kind of reverse engineer that for yourself is knowing the sequence. So beliefs, feelings, action. And actions are the most observable component of that. So if I blew up at a team meeting, like, okay, like people could tell me and I could tell myself like, yes, I yelled at Casey at that meeting. And that's the action, that's the behavior. And then you reverse engineer that to the feeling, like I was feeling angry because, Casey said something that I found offensive. And it's like, okay, then reverse engineer one more step. What was I believing about that? Okay, so one, I was believing that Casey was intentionally trying to offend me when maybe he wasn't. And two, I believe that if someone yells at me, it's okay to yell back. And so those are my belief sets. You can kind of do a little bit of reverse engineering that way. It does take a whole bunch of self-awareness, and you probably need to do it in a mindset when you're calm and kind of steady. But ask a friend, ask a mentor. Obviously, a coach is a great way to dig into this too. But I think so much of our experience in this world and in this life is determined by the contact lens we have in. And so it would do us well to take a little bit of time to dig into that and say, hey, if I just switched out this lens or this prescription, so to speak, would my entire experience change? So instead of being like all these people who are offending me and are these team meetings and yell back at me, like all these people need to change. When what if you could just flip a contact lens and your whole experience changes?
Wow. It's so helpful, and it seems to be very helpful with habit change as well. I think a lot of people, you probably notice this all the time, it turns 3 p.m. just you might not even be hungry, but since it's 3 p.m., you associate that with meeting Ted in the break room, and you're going to finish off, a sleeve of Oreos or something. You might not even be totally aware that you're doing that. Can you talk a little bit about changing the habits that are limiting us from achieving the goals that we want to achieve?
Yeah, for sure. That's also a big topic, but a great one. It's funny you mentioned that example because I have recently been trying intermittent fasting, and I did that for a number of reasons. But one was I literally had these habits built in for when I would eat. And it's like, you wake up and you have breakfast, or, oh, it's 10 o'clock, it's time for my morning snack or whatever. And so part of the reason I did this was to say, hey, can I better determine when I'm hungry, when I'm actually hungry, versus when I'm bored or when I just have that habit built in. And oh my gosh, Casey, I had so many just like habits built in where it's like, oh, it's this time, or I'm doing this activity and therefore I'm going to eat this snack. And it wasn't because I was hungry. It was just because I literally had that built in. So yes, I think it's a great thing to do as well, along with digging into limiting beliefs. Like go throughout your day, or maybe take inventory in a week and see what habits are on autopilot. Your brain builds habits for a good reason. Your brain couldn't possibly put the conscious effort into all the things you do in a day. So it's helping you, it's saving you time. So if you're listening to this, think about tying your shoe. Like how much conscious effort did you put into that? Probably not a lot. You probably just did that on autopilot. When you were a little kid and you were first learning, lots of time. Same thing like when my niece was learning how to drive, she would like sit in the car and adjust the mirrors and adjust the wheel and, do the 3-check reverse, thing before she backed up. And I was like, oh my God, it's taking forever. But she was doing it the right way. When I get in the car, I just get in the car, turn the key and go. So how many things are on autopilot like that? So go throughout your day and literally maybe like, take a notepad or on your phone or whatever and take inventory of the habits you're building up. And same principle, the ones that are serving you, and are getting you to where you want to go or closer to where you want to go, keep those. Cool. Double down on those. And the ones where like, oh my gosh, I'm just doing that because that's what I've always done. And I'm just doing that because maybe it's socially accepted to do that. Or maybe I'm doing that because I think so and so is going to like me more if I do that. Take all of those and, say, make the choice. Like, okay, do I want to decide to do that because it's more trouble that it's worth to get rid of it? Or like, no, I'm swapping that one out. I am getting rid of that. I am stacking this habit with something else. So a great thing to do if you're trying to build a new habit is stack it with an existing one you have. So most of us brush our teeth at least once a day, if not twice a day. If you stack a habit to that where you always do something after you brush your teeth, that's a great way to build something up. So I would, at a high level, I would take inventory of what you're doing now, say, I want to keep these, I want to get rid of those, and then find an existing habit to stack on the new one.
I'm really curious to hear your perspective, having spent, as much time as you have in office buildings themselves, and seeing that change over time. I'm curious to know, like, what you've observed as far as health inside the office building. I remember doing a presentation a few years ago, and we did it for this company externally, so I had to go to their office building. We did it in the break room, and I was stunned by all of these the food and snacks and sugar and all these, diet drinks and beverages and all this stuff. Like, I couldn't believe it. And I just kind of realized, like, it's going to be really tough for these people to maintain good health and fitness if they're exposed to this, like, really appealing food all the time. I wonder if you can comment on what you've noticed as far as, health in the office space itself.
I've experienced a lot of what you've experienced. So a lot of people say, "Hey, I want to be able to give snacks and caffeine to my folks," which might be well intentioned, but they pick possibly the worst worst foods you could, which will spike someone's sugar and then have them crash a few hours later. So I worked for Microsoft very early on in my career, and they had a fully loaded kitchen, and they wanted people to stay in that office and to be able to work. And so it was mostly sugar and caffeine and all these things, which did work if you needed to to get caffeinated. But I think a lot of people need to take that upon themselves to say, hey, I'm going to bring in a better snack for myself, or hey, I'm going to talk to HR or whoever's in charge of the snacks and say, hey, can we get a healthy option, or can we get something that's going to sustain me a little bit longer? A lot of companies are coming over to the more holistic and healthy side of things. I think it's a slow roll, but it's starting to happen. And so people are more open to having those conversations. I remember, this was several years ago now, but we had someone who couldn't eat a certain type of granola bar that we had in the snack. And they said, Emily, can you buy half of this granola bar and half of this other kind that I can eat? And I was like, sure, because I was in charge of that. And the second kind got picked up by a whole bunch of people. So that was popular. But little things like that, I think if your company is so big that you don't feel like you can do that, take it upon yourself to take good care of yourself, and maybe bring in a snack, or bring in the drinks that you like that don't have sugar but have like electrolytes or just plain water, or are infused with fruit, or whatever floats your boat there. And then if you are in a position where you can help decide what your team members have available to them, maybe do a healthy option, or maybe do something that's not going to spike people up and then have them crash down. Sometimes you have to have both, because I know people like donuts and I know people like the pizzas on Fridays sometimes, but just give folks some options there.
Yeah, those are great tips. And I love, we're kind of talking mostly about, physical health, but also you must notice a big difference in mental performance when people are eating, better. They're not snacking all the time. Or maybe they're doing things like incorporating walking meetings and things like that. So they're getting outside and getting fresh air. Do you notice a difference in the way people are performing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can't say more. You can't say enough about this, and especially during COVID, when people are working from home, there was a huge dip in people's mental health. And there's been studies about this. I'm sure there'll be more. But even at the place I'm working now, people had to make that adjustment, and it was tough because people were working long hours, because one, people were scared and they didn't know what was happening with their jobs or the pandemic, but two, they were at home, and so they're like, well, I'm at home, I can just work for like 16 hours a day. And it's like, no, you can't. Like, again, like, appreciate the spirit behind that and wanting to be a team player, but I actually really want people to take time off, not abuse it, but take the necessary time off and then come back. And I expect quality work from them and quality time from that. I mean, quality output and participation and ideas from them. So when people are like, oh my gosh, Emily, like, I'm so sorry, but can I take like 4 hours off next Friday? I'm like, take the whole day if like you need to. Make sure your stuff is tied up and covered and taken care of, but take that time. And I actually, like when people are being serious about their self-care. And as a leader, anyone in a leadership position or just even a friend to a friend, really build that up in people. Say like, hey, like, taking care of yourself is important. It's not selfish to take care of yourself. It's not selfish to do that. It's actually serving the people around you better. Because if you think about it, we've all been tired and all been stressed. And we all know how we interact with people when we're like that. And it's not the greatest. Sometimes we have to, but it's not the greatest interaction. Conversely, if like, you wake up and you feel rested like that, like I slept in on the weekend and I feel rested and I ate well. I didn't have, 5 pizzas and cake and, cookies and everything. I just feel well. The way you interact with people, with your friends, with family, with strangers is much different. And so you're actually serving the people around you at a higher level and much more when you do those things. So I would, anyone listening, take it upon themselves to do that for themselves, and then also really encourage and support people around you who are doing that as well.
I do want to talk about you and your journey personally. Speaking of mental clarity, you just recently started fasting, which is one of our very favorite practices to incorporate and recommend to people. Tell us a little bit about how you found intermittent fasting and why you wanted to try it.
I've heard all around. Again, I fitness health is just kind of something I study on the side and like to try different modalities. So I love eating and I love food. So this was like on the back burner. It was like on the bottom of my list, but it finally came to a point where the piece that I mentioned earlier, which was like, it helps you determine when you're actually hungry. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, okay, maybe I'm not actually hungry all the time. And there's also the mental clarity piece of it that people espoused. So I do 16/8. So I fast for 16 hours and then my eat window is 8. And I found this actually works really well for me. I don't do it every day. I probably do it 5 to 6 days a week. And on my big workout days, which are typically the weekends, I'll eat a little bit more around that. But I found it doesn't really make that big a difference 6 to 7 days. And I hate the word cheat day or cheat meal, but it's just kind of a day where, hey, I'm going to be doing more output. And so I want to fuel my body to get a higher quality workout that day and get more out of it. And then, kind of bump up my calories to tell my metabolism, like, hey, like, stay awake, stay on your toes. I'm going to switch it up on you. And so it doesn't adapt fully to one side of things. But I've been doing it for a couple months and I like it. And it's one of those things where you can put a lot of pressure on yourself. Like, here's my eat window and like, now it's closing and oh no. But if you're just like, no, like I am in control of this. I'm deciding to do this. If I didn't want to fast one day, I don't have to. But it's also a way of saying, no, like I don't have to be a slave to my hunger per se. I don't have to be like, oh, I'm hungry. I have to go find something to eat and I have to find the healthiest thing to eat. Like, no, like if I'm not hungry, maybe I'm thirsty, maybe I'm bored, maybe I go get some water, maybe I go take a walk. And it really puts me in tune with those things, which I like. Certainly, there is the weight loss aspect of it, which happens a little bit for me. And there is the mental clarity piece where, I wake up and my brain works just fine on a fast now. And I just stay hydrated and then kind of work my way to the eat window in midday or early afternoon.
One of the guests that we interviewed talked about the fact that like when he first started fasting, hunger was like a bully. It would come up kind of like what you said, like you have to find something now when you're very, very hungry. And it was a bully that made him pay attention to the hunger until the hunger, was taken care of. And then he'd go back to what he was doing. And he compares it now to just a kind friend who will kind of tap him on the shoulder and just say like, hey, is now a good time to eat? No, like, okay, I'll come back in like 4 or 5 hours. And I love that comparison to where you can train your hunger to be the friend and not the bully. It sounds like that's something that you have also noticed as well.
I like that analogy a lot. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And it's just kind of like tap, 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 like, hey, like we're feeling this. Like, nope, thanks. I'm good. I'm actually, not hungry right now, but thank you. Type of thing. But yeah, like I said, I am now able to say, am I actually hungry versus something else? And so I when I am hungry, I eat. Like, if I'm actually hungry, I'll eat. I'm not going to deprive my self of that just to do it. But vast majority of the time, it's like, nope, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for the tap on the shoulder, but I'm good. Thanks.
Yeah, no, and you get a chance pretty soon to test this out in one of my favorite places to test out intermittent fasting, which is in Hawaii. Like, it's so nice to be on vacation and not have to go to 3 meals a day that take up an hour of your time. You get to go and maybe you can eat, or maybe you can go snorkel or go on a walk or go appreciate the environment, which I do have to say, I don't think it should be legal that somebody from Florida gets to go to Hawaii. That just doesn't seem fair at all.
Yeah, it's like warm and tropical to warm and tropical.
Totally not fair, not fair at all. But it is cool to have that option of, yes, I can eat, or yes, I can go do other things and appreciate where I am and appreciate my vacation.
Yeah, and I think too, uh, the easiest days to fast for me are when I'm busy and when I'm like enjoying what I'm doing, because the time flies by. Literally, I'm like, oh, like I'm an hour over my fast window. Like, let me go get something to eat. So a lot of days are like that. It's not some like, let me like watch my clock. There's 4 hours and 12 minutes left. Like, oh my gosh. So busy is good, and certainly I'll be up doing active things in Hawaii. And you also want to zoom out and have the big picture. Like, sometimes it's fine to just eat a nice meal and not fast. So for instance, if I'm having a really nice family dinner, or Thanksgiving or Christmas, I'm not going to freak out about my macros that day. I'm not going to freak out about my eating window. That is a time for me to concentrate on having a really nice time with my family and just not stressing it out about those things. So I'd keep that in mind too. Obviously, most of the year I eat very cleanly and I eat, very well. But there's key places or key moments where it's actually probably the better thing for your overall health not to stress out about that and just enjoy the time and enjoy the experience.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. If you're doing fasting at least some of the time, I think it does open yourself up to, having the option to eat more foods and eat more quantity when you want to. So I think that's a wonderful practice. You also mentioned physical fitness, obviously being very important to you. And it sounds like you've tweaked things quite a bit over time. Tell us how your understanding of fitness has evolved as you've evolved also.
Yeah, at the beginning, I didn't know what I was doing. So that was the starting point. I would just go in and I would do like elliptical for like 70 minutes and then go and like eat it all back in one thing. I just didn't know like how the body worked. And I didn't know how things work together. But yeah, now I kind of prescribe to, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Mike Isotel and Dr. James Hoffman of Renaissance Periodization.
No, I'm going to
But
look that up.
they have great stuff. Their whole thing is like, the science behind fitness and the science behind working out. And they have great stuff. They're on YouTube and they're on RP Fitness. I'm not affiliated with them, by the way, but RP Fitness, they just have great stuff. And they work with bodybuilders, like competitive bodybuilders, and they take them through these different phases of working out. So like their gaining phase, and then they do a recovery phase or a deload, and then they do another gaining phase if you're trying to gain muscle. And they have very prescriptive, but they also give you frameworks for how to make it work best for you. So I'm not a competitive bodybuilder at all, but I just kind of take some of the concepts and tools that I can apply to myself and just have fun with and play around with those. But I love kind of tinkering with my diet and what works best with my digestive system and what fuels me best for certain types of workouts. And then also there's a whole bunch of stuff you can play around with in the gym itself, or in whatever sport you're playing, and different training modalities and training practices and things like that. So I could go on and on for rep ranges and rest periods and recovery stuff and all that. Happy to do that, but that's generally the approach I take. Is like, okay, what phase am I in? And when I'm on vacation, I try to match that up with kind of my deload week or my active recovery phase, so I don't have to go super hard at the gym if there's not a good hotel gym, or eat super cleanly if I'm kind of working with different restaurants or food sources. But when I get back to it, it's like, okay, I'm in the gain phase, or I'm in the cut phase, or here's what I'm trying to do with this 6 to 12 weeks. And I have a program that kind of works my way up through that phase. So like if you have a 12-week block and you're trying to do certain things, they literally lay out like at the beginning, you should actually start pretty easy and work your way up all the way to near failure and progressively overload in that block. So I know that's a lot of information, but that's the general approach that I use.
You crushed it. That was amazing. In the world of bro science, we just so much appreciate people who are doing the actual science out there and putting out that work. It sounds like you found something that is very practical, is very effective, and it's nice to be on a system. So it's not just like, okay, I'm wandering into a gym. What should I use? That machine's free. I guess I'll use that one. Hopefully I'll use it correctly and not hurt myself or look silly and end up on gym fails or something. So that's awesome. We will definitely link to that in the notes, and I will be looking that up as soon as we get off of this call. That's awesome. I'm curious to know how you are working with people these days, and what methods do you like to work with people to help them hack their executive leadership?
Yeah, certainly. So I take on a certain number of clients at whatever I can at the moment, and basically engagements vary quite a lot. So an example I can use is on one end of the spectrum is someone might need help with interview prep. So maybe they're going for a C-level role or a VP role. They have an all-day interview like next Thursday, and so Emily, can I get 2 sessions real quick to prep for that? So that might be one type of engagement. Another one on the other end of the spectrum would be I've had a client for 3 years, and we meet weekly just for 30 minutes. And she brings, whatever's going on in her work world. If she has a challenging conversation coming up, we talk about that. How to structure the team, we talk about that. She's got a long-term goal for herself to get from a, tactical operation mindset into a more strategic, big thinker leadership mindset, and being seen like that. And putting yourself in position for that. So that's a lot of fun. But both of those and everything in between. If you're kind of in the business world and working on yourself, leading a team, building your leadership, I love working with those types of clients.
That's fantastic. This has been such a cool conversation. We've covered so much ground that I think is just so relevant and applicable to so many different things. But if you had to distill down one simple tip that you would like to leave the listener with from this conversation, what would that one tip be?
Yeah, I think, you are unique. And so the frameworks and skills and tools that are going to work for you might be different from me. They are different from me and different from Casey, but really, embrace that and find the things that work for you. So we were just talking about like the workout modality. Go look that up and learn about it, and then find the pieces that work for you and apply them. And if you go throughout your life that way, you're just going to pick up little tools and tips and tricks, and you can make your own toolbox and make it yourself. So I do that with people with leadership, and certainly with fitness and nutrition. Like if a certain diet doesn't work for you, don't do it. Pick the stuff that is applicable and relevant and most helpful to you. But that's what I would really try to encourage people to do, is that you don't have to find like the silver bullet. You don't have to like go, be exactly like this person. Find what works for you. And that could be an amalgamation of a whole bunch of different areas, and really be okay with like, hey, I'm going to do this my way, and I'm going to do it myself, and it's what works best for me, and that's how I get myself to the next level.
I absolutely love that. Couldn't agree more. Emily Sander, where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Absolutely. The best place is probably my website. So it's nextlevel.coach. That's nextlevel, all one word, .coach. And we've touched on a few frameworks here, but if you like some of those, you can read about more in my book, Hacking Executive Leadership, and that's on Amazon. There's Kindle and Audible and all that good stuff.
That is tremendous. We will link to that in the show notes. Emily Sander, author of the book, Hacking Executive Leadership. Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I certainly learned a lot and will take a lot of really practical tips into my life. We really appreciate you and your work and everything that you've learned along the way, and your ability to share it in a way that is really simple to understand and like we said, very practical and applicable. So thank you so much for everything that you do, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today on our show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Casey.
Enjoy Hawaii.
Will do.
Awesome. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.